Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. What is a surefire way to accelerate the achievement of your goals and have fun at the same time? Collaborating with others is an effective method to build strategic relationships that enable much quicker and hopefully far more reaching results than can be achieved either on your own or perhaps through intimidation or even conflict. My guest today, Peter Anthony, is an expert in the influencing of customers and stakeholders, gained through 40 years of experience in 3 professions on 4 continents. Peter has learned to influence, not sell, and to pitch with a strategic story, not with a presentation. Today, I want to explore how Peter can help us to discover the necessary skills we may use in our business and personal lives. So, without further ado, I welcome Peter onto the podcast. Hi, Peter.
G'day, Dave. G'day, guys. How you going? From Sydney, Australia, of all places.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm sure it's a slightly better weather there than we've got here. We're immersed in floodwater here, but there we go.
Wow. No, it's almost 30 degrees, sunny, beachy. I'm on the northern beaches in Sydney, if anyone knows Sydney. So it's one of the best times of the year to live here.
Right. Well, it sounds absolutely awful. There we go. Okay. So let's find out more about you. You've got a very interesting background. Can you talk us through some of the perhaps standout moments in your journey that have guided you to write your book, Collabradabra, The Psychology of Collaborative Conversations, and to coach business leaders in the skill of collaboration?
That's a great question, Dave. Sometimes I ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? It began originally in my career. I spent almost 12 years in advertising, working for the big global agencies, running brand campaigns for them, and I really enjoyed that. And I was more interested in getting, I guess, broader and deeper into this whole sales and marketing relationship. I worked for a big consulting and training firm. I thought I'll go out on my own, which I did in 1998. And I soon found 2 things. One, it was a very competitive marketplace. There are a lot of people like Peter Anthony out there doing what I was attempting to do. And secondly, I found that selling didn't work. And what I was selling, I was teaching organizations to sell. And I found it wasn't working. And people were buying it. People were running workshops and asking me to consult. But I felt like a bit of a charlatan, Dave, because I realized that it didn't work. And the best salespeople I'd met weren't actually selling. And that started me asking the question, well, if selling doesn't work, and there are lots of reasons it doesn't, but you think, well, it feels a bit fake. It creates distance between you and the person you're attempting to sell to. And even if you're a buyer, if you're selling, you're in a sales role. And particularly I've found with people in buying professions, they're particularly uncomfortable with that. So that started me thinking, well, if that doesn't work, what does? I went back to university, did a master's in communications so I could study it from an academic point of view, and began building this collaborative approach, which I called Collabradabra, because there's, like abracadabra, there's magic in collaboration. And fortunately, since I've got 5 children, a dog and a cat to support, it worked. It worked.
That's really, really interesting. Yes, collaboration is a kind of skill, I feel, and it's very easy to have a relationship that isn't built on honesty. And I feel collaboration is more of an honest way of working with other people. Now, obviously, you recommend collaborative influence as an approach in conversations. And that helps to, I believe, deepen relationships and obviously understand how people make decisions. And you refer to 4 reasons to collaborate in those conversations. Can you talk us through what those 4 reasons are?
Well, the first is you've got to understand why collaboration is important and buy into the idea. And you can look almost anywhere in history or in science to find your answer. You could look back, say, in evolutionary biology and say, well, the reason us Homo sapiens, of which we're all descendants, originally began to compete and do better as a species was because they learned to collaborate with each other. Their brains developed, their frontal cortex developed. Part of that was a language centre so that they could communicate better with each other and collaborate. And hence they became a more successful species and were the forefathers of where we are now. If you look at business organisations, people like Rachel Butzman, she ran a master's in collaboration at Oxford for many years. She wrote it and ran it. She predicted the rise of Airbnb and Uber because she predicted this collaborative economy. And she said, look, taxi drivers aren't collaborating with passengers. People running hotels aren't collaborating with guests. And she predicted that when the digital disruption happened, that organisations that understood their clients or customers better would then create, through that disruption, create better, more effective relationships. If you look at societies, there's great work done by Elinor Ostrom. In fact, she won a Nobel Prize for economics in her work on collaborative cultures by studying the tragedy of the commons. Then you look at even people like John Gottman at Washington State University. He looks at personal relationships like marriages, and he asks people to talk to each other, and he content analyzes the conversation, and he predicts whether that relationship is doomed or not, just based on how that couple collaborates through the conversations they have. So there's a ton of great evidence. And in the commercial space, of which I've been working for many, many years in 12 different countries, I've consistently found that the organisations that collaborate both internally and externally are the most effective. So the first thing I'd suggest is to think of collaboration as an imperative, because if you're interested in growing a profitable business, collaboration is the path. Then you think, well, if that's the path or that's the decision I'm making, how do I go about doing that? And that's the next question.
Yeah. Now, when I was going through your book and reading the notes, one thing that did jump out to me, certainly as a buyer, is that you don't like to be sold to. I like to build a relationship with the other person. I want them to understand my problems. I want them to help me seek out solutions, not just trying to sell me a product. And that's one of the things I think you referred to in your notes. And that resonated with me quite quickly. There's nothing worse than somebody coming in with a hard sale on something I may or may not need. So I found that very useful. You mentioned about better relationships. I quite absolutely agree with that. People sell to people. There's no doubt about that. I buy from people I like more likely than somebody who, let's say, we don't see eye to eye. Perhaps that's one way of putting it, I guess.
Yeah. And you ask yourself the question, of which I've asked many times. You think, people do buy from people they like. You think, well, what does that mean? What does like mean? Like, who do you like? Like in a commercial sense, who do you like? And you think, if I look at the exit research, which I do quite regularly, when customers are asked, why did you decide in that way? I work on a lot of tenders, helping organisations on either side, primarily people pitching on large tenders, like large engineering firms, for example. And if you ask the clients or the customers, why did you decide that way? The number one answer that comes out, Dave, is that they uniquely understand my needs and my environment. And it's that above price, above product, above like all the other things. Because in most markets I'm involved in, there are competitors. There's very few markets where I'd say there's no competitor. There's always a competitor. And one of the biggest competitors you've got is to do nothing or do nothing yet. So you think if I'm looking for them to feel like, or for me to demonstrate, I uniquely understand their needs and their environment, how do I go about doing that? I go about doing that by being curious, by caring, and by building that unique understanding. And I like what Stephen Covey suggested in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, when he said, seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. So you must understand them first. Understand them, their needs, their environment. And once you've got that, some surprising things can happen. It takes a little bit longer in the beginning, but things happen faster in the end. In fact, Stephen Covey's son, Stephen R. Covey, wrote a huge book called The Speed of Trust. And his whole premise was that trust takes longer to build, but once you've got it, things happen faster. So I'd recommend that likability, if you like, that you mentioned, Dave. That's based on on them feeling genuinely that you've taken the time to uniquely understand their needs and their environment.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I find when I'm working with people, collaborating with people, is that as the old adage, two minds are better than one. And when you consolidate that knowledge from both the supplier side and my side, we tend to achieve things in a much quicker way, but we also tend to expand on things by sharing our knowledge and questioning each other. Would you think that's a fair thing to say as a benefit of collaboration?
You've hit the bingo button, Dave. It's one of the outcomes of a successful collaboration. I used that word pro-social before with Eleanor Ostrom's work. One of the outcomes is that you get more of what you're looking for, they get more of what they're looking for, and there's usually an outcome which neither of you could achieve by yourself. So even for both sides of the relationship, I don't think buyer seller. I don't think like that. With all respect to the real life buyer, sure. What I think is that there's two people collaborating to achieve an outcome. Mm-hmm. It just happens to be that they're bringing different levels of knowledge and a different perspective to that relationship. So that's definitely the case. Something bigger and better happens as a result. Like if I'm looking towards getting a bridge built or a dam built or a new airport built, or I'm running a major mine, I'm looking for people to help me like get the equipment required to achieve the task. I've got the problem, you've got a potential set of solutions or a way of looking at that problem, and together we can achieve more than we could by ourselves. That's when it feels great. And you get that bingo moment in a conversation. We think, wow, this is great. This is something new. You are literally co-creating something better, and that's the best feeling. Yeah. It's a great feeling to have that happen.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned about new products, or should we say, because obviously in developing new products, I personally really enjoy the process by which you bring suppliers to your business. You look at designs together, not just a designer designing something and say, please make me this. I like to get the supplier directly involved with the design to say, you've got some great expertise here. Is this the best way to design it? Is it, are these features actually going to be, reap the rewards? Is this going to be made at a lower cost by doing it this way or that way? And they come in with lots of ideas, say, oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And you end up with a new product, should we say, that's far better than it would have been if you had tried just to say, I want this.
Absolutely. And some of the largest and most successful suppliers in the world, and the ones that research their customers the best, are the organizations like the Nestle's, for example, who make products for, say, Tesco, for example. And they only develop products with the shopper and the consumer in mind. The people doing the shopping, the people doing the consuming, they would not ever develop a new brand of anything without the consumer or customer being very heavily involved. And what we know is that success leaves clues. And you think, what do the most successful people do in any industry? They are people that are engaging with their clients or customers very early in the process. I mean, if I was starting a business now, like just say, for example, I'd been a successful buyer in the corporate world and I was thinking about starting a business consulting as a buyer, the very first thing I would do would be to make a list of all clients or potential clients or customers and potential customers and share my thinking with them. I'd say, hey, Dave, I'm planning on leaving, company X. I'm really keen to get more involved in consulting in this space. What would your recommendations or suggestions be? Get their fingerprints on the business plan as early as possible. It's very hard to create something in a vacuum and then through your genius present it to the market and keep your fingers crossed that they'll buy it, because it's then you'll find the problems after you've done the work.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you're talking about that. It's an area that, I think that a lot of people are transitioning at the moment from, especially following COVID, where they think, hold on a minute, do I still want to be in this employed role? If you're not going to leave the workforce, sometimes people think about starting up their new business, and they therefore try and develop a product or service that they think people want to buy. I think the word I mentioned there is think people want to buy. Now, your actively saying, well, no, go and find out what people want and make that available to them. Is that correct?
Yes, and what I'd suggest is to moonlight. If you're still employed and you're considering consulting or working for yourself, what I'd suggest is keep working for the organisation that you're with, and moonlight in the evenings or on the weekends, developing this business. And you could be doing what you're doing, Dave. You could start podcasts. You could start a YouTube channel talking about your ideas. And what you'll find is that as you develop them and as you talk about them, that expertise will grow and start having those conversations. I did this in 1998 when I moved from a large consulting firm to working for myself. There was no YouTube then. There was no podcast back then. I'm one of those dinosaurs that was around before this technology was around. And I asked my clients, I said, look, I'm planning to do this myself. I've got a unique perspective, a unique approach that I really want to develop. It's around this idea of collaboration. The consulting firm I was working for wasn't interested in going down that track. And I talked with my clients, and they knew what my plans were. And fortunately enough, and I did this for 4, 5, 6 months, and I developed my ideas by talking to them, and it gave me the confidence that what I was doing was something that they'd be interested in exploring. I wasn't competing with my employer because what I was doing was something that they weren't offering.
Yeah.
And fortunately enough, 3 of the clients that I spoke to, which were 3 huge brands, all asked me to work with them. And 2 of them are still working with me now, bizarrely enough.
Yeah.
So I'd start the conversations early, be as open and as honest and as collaborative as you can from the beginning. Like, don't create it. What did Kevin Costner say? Build it and they will come. I will say, no. Don't build it and they will come. Build it with them. Build it with them. And then you will both enjoy a better field of dreams, if you like.
Yeah. Cool. And the key thing here is that you're not selling to them. I think you say in your book, it drives increased sales if you're collaborating with people, then trying to push a sale on to them.
Yes.
What's the difference, would you say, if you're having to put some numbers behind that, as selling versus collaborating? Is there a way of measuring or explaining what the benefits of collaborating are in a numerical way?
Yes, there are, and I've done extensive research with clients because often when I'm working with a new client in particular, I'll explain the approach to them, and they'll say, well, they like to test and roll out. They like to pilot things, right? So I'll say, let's take 2 sales teams. You keep doing the traditional approach with team A, and I'll take team B and teach them this different way of building relationships and engaging with their clients. And that team could be a team of 10, it could be a team of 100. That doesn't really matter. Actually, the larger the better is what my preference is. We track their sales results over time, depending upon how long the sales cycle is. Sometimes that sales cycle might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. We get consistent results, like consistent improvements in results of between probably 9 and 15 or 16%, because we're working on margins because they already have a sales relationship with the people that we're talking to. But it works the same way with new clients. Like if they're not a client or customer at all, and you're quite open to them, you say, look, I'm Peter Anthony. I'm really keen on exploring whether we could have a potential partnership together and deliver some outcomes together. Would you mind if I spoke to you about how we could build a collaborative relationship and achieve some outcomes together? You'll always get a yes. They'll always be interested in talking to you. And it starts the conversation on a different foot than, hi, I'm Peter Anthony. I'd like to sell my buying consulting services to you. Because what happens is you're putting them in a buyer mode. And as soon as they feel like they're the buyer, creates all that distance between you and them. It just changes the relationship. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
It definitely happens. Fortunately, it does. And I also feel that it's a great time to collaborate now too, Dave, because if you look at the Pew Research out of the US, they've found we've never been more polarized. And part of this is because of the way social media operates, in that if we're on, no matter what social platform we're on, we tend to get fed, their algorithm feeds us up more of what we already know and reinforces our existing biases. I mean, there's a big issue now going on between Harry and Meghan and the royal family, right?
Indeed.
If you're a supporter of the monarchy and a supporter of the royal family and you're on YouTube, you'll get fed constant YouTube clips and news stories about Charles and about Will and Kate and how wonderful they are. If you're in the US, you're the side of Harry and Meghan, you'll get fed up all the stuff that they're saying on Spare and the Netflix documentaries. It just gets reinforced. So we have got more polarized and more entrenched. So it would be refreshing for people to hear that I'm interested in building a collaborative relationship. Here's why. Here's the sort of outcomes we can expect. And I'd be really keen first to understand your unique environment and how I could potentially help you or not, because you've got to be willing to walk away. Because if you're offering collaboration, you've got to be walking away early if the opportunity isn't right for you. And that's a good thing, because that will give you more time to focus on the opportunities for you that will help you grow your business. Yeah?
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's made me think a little bit there. What we're talking about particularly, obviously, is conversations. And
yes.
Another thing I've picked up when I've been looking through your stuff is that you refer to moments in a conversation that really matter. And I think you referred to something like 6 moments. Can you talk us through what are these moments in a conversation that are important and we should take note of?
That's a great question, Dave, because you can. How do you translate all this theory into practice? And that the practice is conversations, which is usually how business is done, a series of conversations. Now, the first moment that matters is before the conversation takes place, which is when you decide to achieve an outcome with this person. And you're thinking about one of 3 potential outcomes. You're thinking of changing how they're thinking, changing how they're feeling, or changing what they're doing. And you're thinking about this in a beneficial way for them. So it might be you're changing how they're thinking. You are whatever consulting service you may be selling, or product you may be selling, or being involved in that buying relationship. You think, well, I need to, my goal is to help them understand a fresh perspective on this, like a unique and valuable perspective. That might be changing how they're thinking. It could be changing what they're doing. They're working with a different supplier who may not be achieving the sort of outcomes that they could with you. Or it might be changing how they're feeling, how they don't know who you are. You just want them to feel more comfortable and confident that you're a trusted pair of hands. You're someone that does understand their environment and can deliver some unique value. So that's the decision you make before the conversation takes place, and that gives the conversation some intent, and it gives it momentum. And you're quite. This is nothing secretive. You're telling them that this is like quite open as far as what's happening. That's moment number 1. Moment number 2 happens when you meet them and the conversation first starts. And there's a lot been written in sales books, from right back to people like Tom Hopkins, who wrote You Can Master the Art of Selling Anything, about all these tricky ways of building rapport and sitting a certain way and matching and all those sorts of things. You can try that. Most of us feel that's a bit fake. What I'd suggest is you do 2 things if you're thinking of building a good relationship initially with someone. One is get very present, like just be very present where you are. And there's lots of good theories and practices on presence and mindfulness. Get present and then transfer your presence to the other person. So you're giving them all of your attention, and they'll feel that. And what will happen is you will subconsciously and subtly begin adjusting your style to suit theirs. And as you adjust your style to suit theirs, they're more willing and able to adjust their thinking to suit yours. It's the beginning of that trust relationship. It's not about you, it's about them. And the other thought I'd give you there, Dave, is to listen until you disappear. Listen until you disappear. So it's never about you. It's always about them, and you'll get what you want when they get what they want. So that's the beginning, and that continues. You continue, and as soon as you feel like the attention's back on you, you just transfer it back to them again. And watch any relationship you're in change dramatically when you give them your full attention. Because again, it's rare now to be talking to someone when you've got their full attention. They're not like checking emails or looking at their phone or watching a football game. They're doing something else as well. So that's moment number 2, and that continues. Now, moment 3, and this could be depending upon who you're working with. Some clients I work with are very direct when I get to business straight away. Other clients want to have a chat first. But I've noticed you, Dave, you like a bit of personal rapport first and have a chat, which is great, and then work into the business part, which is really, really lovely. Other people want to get straight to business, zero personal rapport. And that's great. But you'll find that there's a moment that comes when you need to take the lead. You are leading a conversation. You're not dominating them, just leading. And you're doing this by answering 4 questions. You're saying, you're suggesting, look, here's the reason we're meeting, Dave. Here's the reason we thought it's important to get together. You've got a particular issue or concern in the organisation that we can have a conversation about. The outcome we're after is for for me to understand what that particular issue may be and present potential solutions or a potential way forward. How I thought we could do that. This is the how part is. I'll get a full understanding of what it is that you're looking at or what you're facing, what the issues are that you have. I'll then share with you our unique approach to dealing with issues like this, and then we can agree on a way forward or not. It will depend upon whether we can help you. And as soon as you say, like, you're not putting too much pressure on the conversation, things will open up. You've always got to be in the position where you're willing to walk away. I don't mean arrogantly, but you've always got to give them the impression, because it's true, that you're willing to walk away, because your biggest salespeople are your clients. They live in tribes of people that are similar to them, and they will sell you much harder and longer than you ever will. And then the final part of that setup, or that leading part, is so what's next? So if we can find a way of moving forward, we can then arrange a more, you can come to our business, or I can come back with my colleagues, and we can make a more detailed approach once we've considered exactly what you're looking for. And then how does that sound? That sounds great, Peter. I like the way you're approaching this. You're not telling them, you're sharing it with them and getting them to be engaged, because you're collaborating from the beginning. So that's the structure part. Now, that might be the first couple of minutes of the conversation. So you could be in minute 2 or 3. So you've transferred your attention to them. You've set the meeting up by taking the lead. Then you get to moment number 4, which is where you do the understanding piece, which is when I quoted Stephen Covey a bit earlier, seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. I'd recommend suspend your need to make a presentation. PowerPoint is the doom. It's the Darth Vader of a collaborative relationship. I see too many people, they spend hours or weeks developing these awesome PowerPoint and slide presentations and how wonderful they are, and all these pictures and examples and words, and like, suspend all that. Don't ever take PowerPoint to one of these meetings. Just leave it behind. Just stop that addiction. And you're looking to understand. You think, well, how do I understand in moment number 4? What do I do this? Well, I really need to understand not how they're thinking or how they're feeling. You want to understand really how they're making decisions. And when you think about any decision you make, whether you're buying a car, going to a football game, how do you spend the weekend, where you're going to play golf, what you wear in the morning, there's a whole range of decisions you're making. You think, well, there's 4 parts of any decision that you need to understand. And the first of those is, we call them decision-making values, because you think, well, every decision is made on criteria or values. So I need to understand what their decision-making values or criteria are. So you think, well, you'd say, well, Dave, when you're thinking about a decision like this, what sort of things are important to you? What sort of things do you consider? And they'll typically give you 3, possibly 4 criteria. So you need to know what they are. Now, in traditional selling, they think, well, that's enough. Well, it's not enough. You think, okay, that's really interesting. And you're writing them down word for word. The words are really important, because the way they think is with words. We all know that we think neuro-linguistically. We think in words. So you write those words down. Then you'd say, look, anything else, Dave? No, I'm just curious, Dave. What order would you put those in? Because they might not come out in the first, second, third, fourth.
Yeah,
some people think geometrically, other people don't. You might get the most important one last. Because you might think, oh, really? I didn't think about board approval. I didn't think about getting Mary involved. Didn't think about what. So having Catherine on board is a key part of this too. And you think, okay, so how is the decision made? There could be other people involved. And you need to know that early. I was involved in a major consulting with a major CRM provider, a global CRM provider. And when they asked me, I said, so what are you looking for? How could I potentially help you? And they said, look, too many of our sales fall down at the end. They look really good until the end, and then something happens because we don't understand who all the stakeholders are that are involved, because often we're dealing with more junior people and they don't let us know the other stakeholders. So that's the first and second part. What are the criteria? What order are they in? The third and fourth are my favourites, though, Dave. The third is, what does that mean? Like for each of those criteria or decision-making values, what does that mean? Like when you say something like quality, I'm going to think quality means for me what it means to you. I'm going to assume that. I need to understand. So I'm just curious, Dave, when you say quality, what does that mean for you? I'm really curious. So how do you know when you've got quality? Right? Or if you say, we want to work with someone who's got a track record in this, but what does track record mean? Does that mean like number of clients, number of installations? Do you want us to have worked globally on this? Do you want me to have worked in different geographies, different applications? I'm really curious. What you'll find too is that often the person that you're talking to may not have thought about this for a while. They could even be old or historic values they had a couple of years ago that they're just revisiting now, and things are changing faster than ever before. So you're curious, you get all the meanings. And the fourth part of understanding, this is a good marker for the quality of the relationship, and that is, what are you concerned about most here, Dave? What concerns you most in considering this decision? And if you've got a quality relationship and you have a climate of trust, they'll tell you what they're most concerned about. And ideally, you want to hear concerns. Old school selling says, sell sizzle, not steak, like only talk benefits. But the good science says you need to understand their fears and their concerns, because they'll do more to avoid what they're concerned about than to gain what their desires are. If that makes sense. Maybe that's too much of a chunk in one sentence. So you need to understand what they don't want and help them feel comfortable that you are a safe pair of hands and that you can uniquely deliver something, not just that delivers what they're looking for, but doesn't deliver what they're not looking for. And at this stage, you might think, oh, look, this is not a potential client of mine. And you want to know that early because you don't want to waste time on opportunities you can't progress. And too often in these commercial relationships, particularly with big clients I work with, they're nice to you by pretending they're going to buy something from you, and they never will.
Yeah.
So you're going to be like big enough, put your big person pants on, and say, you know what, I need to walk away from this.
Yeah.
And be quite honest about that. Say, hey, look, Jack, Bob, Mary, you're looking for somebody with a global network with a 10-year track record of successful implementations in challenging environments. That's not what we do. So I really appreciate this conversation. I can give you a couple of perspectives or ideas on the problem you're facing, but it's been really great talking to you, and very respectfully pull back, because that means then you're in control and you can spend time developing the relationships that will yield benefits for you in your, particularly if it's new. You want to have clients you can spend a lot of time on, and you can develop and deliver an outstanding result. So that's moment number 4. Yeah, at the under, and that might be the whole conversation, or you might come back and have that again and dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And the quality of the collaboration and that relationship is the quality of your understanding of them. And think about like great friends you might have, or a great romantic marriage, relationship or marriage you might have. All the good relationships are built on understanding them, and they understand you, you understand them, and it's a pleasure to be around them. Then moment number 5 comes when you're making a recommendation. And I've already suggested you might recommend that doesn't progress. You're not always looking for it to progress. Sometimes it won't progress. You're making a recommendation based on your unique understanding of their needs that you've just found out through that prior part of the conversation. You're making it consistent with those decision-making values or those decision-making criteria. Ideally, that's the case. You're making a recommendation consistent, or you could be making a recommendation that's inconsistent with what they just said. Now, hold it, Peter. Make a recommendation inconsistent with what they've just said. Yeah, that can happen for excellent reasons, because it's very likely you have a better understanding of what their issue is than they do, particularly if they're senior in an organisation. I mean, I was working with a bizarre group of guys recently that are into conveyor belt monitoring, of all things. I didn't even think it existed, right?
Okay.
But I'm thinking the guy that runs it, it's a very successful global consulting business that consults on conveyor belt monitoring. I'm thinking, wow, this is bizarre. I've got to meet this guy. He's always been ever since he was a kid, he was into conveyor belts. I'm thinking, I've got to meet this guy. He knows more about conveyor belts than anybody else. And he's got a group of experts around him that are experts in conveyor belts. So, but the people he's talking to don't know as much about conveyor belts as he does. So when they're thinking about refreshing their system or looking at a different way of conveyor belting, if that's the right expression, he often gives them criteria or ideas they've never even heard of because he's the expert. So you might make a recommendation that's inconsistent with their values, and that's okay. It's called the challenger model. You're challenging their thinking in a respectful way. You're not arguing with them. You just say, hey, Dave, have you considered this? Have you considered this different approach? And that will also test the quality of the relationship. So you make a recommendation consistent with what they're looking for, or it's inconsistent but still valuable because you're looking towards delivering value and leaving them better off as a result of the conversation. The final part's the agreeing part. You've made the recommendation to them. The moment number 6 is when you're reaching an agreement. The agreement could be it's not proceeding. That's great. I like that. So it could be a yes, that's great, Dave. Let's organise a meeting next week and look at this in a lot more depth. So it might be a yes, that's great. It might be a no, which that's even better because it won't waste your time. And if you're starting a new business now, you will spend too much time chasing opportunities that will never come to fruition. So I'd find the good ones early and knock yourself out delivering them great results. Or it could be a maybe. Dave, that sounds like we might need to consider it, but I'm not 100% sure. You think, okay, well, Dave, what would make you sure? Well, we need to get Mary involved, or Catherine, she's the commercial director. That's terrific. So can we arrange a time that the three of us catch up? And then we can get Mary's perspective, the commercial director's perspective on this, or whatever else it might be. And when you're looking at a maybe, there's a whole chapter in the book about how to translate a maybe into a yes that's worth having for both of you, or not, like a simple negotiating piece, not like hostage crisis negotiation, but just a simple model of understanding where the positions are, where they are, where you are, where the potential zone of settlement might be, and agreeing. But you're always looking for an opportunity to exit, like thinking, no, this is not the right opportunity for me. And that's been so important, particularly when I started out. I spent far too much time trying to chase people down that were never going to be clients. And I learned to focus on the ones and just over-service them because I had the time. I wasn't wasting time on people that weren't going to be potential business partners. So they're the 6 moments that matter.
Yeah, that's an awful lot of information there. I think people have to dissect that, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. I loved your mention of PowerPoint because I've had great conversations, started off great conversations with salespeople, and then they felt this compulsion to get the PowerPoint presentation out because that's what they needed to do. And it ruins the moment, doesn't it? The fluidity of the relationship being built is destroyed by the PowerPoint moment. So yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, some really interesting stuff there. I'm gonna have to rewind this and think about this a few things as well. But I'm thinking about now where quite often, and there are certain buying roles or industry sectors where the relationship between the supplier and the buyer is adversarial.
Yes.
Now, if you happen to have been somebody who's been fairly adversarial in nature, and you realize that that isn't the right way going forwards, how do you flip the relationship to such that you want it to become more collaborative? You realize the error of your ways, say, how do those people that have been entrenched in one way of working change their approach? Have you have any experience of that?
Absolutely, Dave. And that's very common in buying, right? But probably more traditional buying was more adversarial, where
Absolutely,
a buyer was someone who, by definition, was adversarial. People were afraid. If you were selling, you'd be afraid of meeting a buyer, like a buyer in a big hospital or a buyer in a big engineering firm. They were typically that style of person. Now, the reason I'm confident that that can change, just say, for example, I was a buyer for many years and I developed my adversarial skills. And now I'm interested in collaborating. I think, well, how do I turn from being an adversarial buyer into being a collaborative seller? That's a big flip, right? That's a huge personality flip. Now, what I'd encourage you to think about is what modern positive psychology is telling us. And you think, well, flipping from being adversarial to being collaborative is flipping from being outcome focused to being people focused. And I'd like you to, and I know this because I do a lot of coaching on what's called psychometrics and understanding people's personality and how to help them become more collaborative. Now, if you think of outcome focus at one end of the line, and you think of people focus at the other, and you think of them as extremes. If you think of good psychometrics, all that means is how your personality is measured. Most people are in the middle of the bell. Think of it as a bell curve. So it starts people focused. There's a flat line. There's a big bell. Then there's a flat line to outcome focus. They're both extremes. Most people are in the middle. Now, what happens is over time, you get more rewarded for being outcome focused and being adversarial in the role that you're in. That doesn't mean you can't be people focused. It's definitely in your DNA. In fact, it's more likely that you've got more people focus in your DNA than what you're exhibiting. And the reason I know that, I can't go into too much depth here, we haven't got the time, but there's two different parts of your personality. There's an underlying part and an everyday part. And most folks I've coached, and I've done this almost 1,000 times in individual psychometrics, most people are a lot more collaborative and people focused underlying, and then every day when they come to work, they create this outcome focused veneer. So I would strongly suggest and almost know that anyone listening here has a lot more people focus than they would be exhibiting in that adversarial role. They wouldn't really enjoy it. They wouldn't really like being that person, or very few do, unless you're a real psychopath. And there's very few of those. So I suggest it's there, and you will feel better as a result of bringing more of your people focus to the front. And the reason I know that is good positive psychology says the number one marker for happiness, self-reported happiness, is quality and depth of relationships. Okay. So when you have good relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, business relationships, you feel better because we are hardwired to collaborate from an evolutionary perspective. That's who we are. You will feel better. You'll find it easier than being adversarial. So that's a complicated answer to a simple question, but I know this to be true. And it's great when I'm coaching people through this to see those lights go on and see them happier. And just not being a nice pushover and like appeasing and giving in, but just being collaborative. And you'll find you'll get better results, as we've talked about, plus you'll feel better, because it's more in your nature to be collaborative. Does that make sense, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. We're running low on time now. Before I go into my last question, how could people learn a lot more about what you're explaining today? Which is the best media to go to, other than, of course, buy your book?
No, not buy a book. Buy 2 books, Dave. No,
indeed, yes. Buy one for your friends and family.
Yeah, collaborate. Buy them all a book. No. Well, that's obviously a good place to start. I've got a lot of free resources as well, which I'm sure you'll put in the show notes. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a website. I've made a lot of YouTube videos that explain this approach in more detail. You don't need to subscribe, or you won't get spammed by me. It's just there because I want to spread this collaboration message. So I suggest that's all there for free. Have a look at it. It's been like well produced, but by me, but by people that know how to make good video pieces. Have a look at that. There are if you Google collaboration or collaborative strategy, there is a ton available. And the reason there's a ton available is because it is the way businesses are doing business now. There's some great work. In particular, have a look at anything from the Wharton Business School on collaboration. They're one of the leaders in this, that they lead the world in what's called client-centric or customer-centric collaboration. So I'd lean that way if you're more academically inclined. They've got some great work where they've researched clients and companies in profitable sales growth, and how the collaborators and people that put their customer at the center of their strategy and develop a unique value proposition are the ones that experience the most profitable growth. So that's hardcore science there. That's where I'd suggest. After they buy my book, of course.
Of course, indeed.
Of course, that's a given.
Okay, one final question. Obviously,
Sure.
when you're going into negotiations or meetings and you have the intention to collaborate, one would like to assume that all participants are thinking in that way, that you want to work together and collaborate. Now, occasionally, I'm sure there are times when there are people who go in with the intention not to collaborate, but under the ruse of collaboration to try and get more information out of them, to use that in perhaps a way of negotiating in their favor. How do you determine there are people who are working in that way and kind of expose, that sort of dishonesty in some ways, you could say, so that you don't get sucked into revealing everything and gaining nothing in return, or you don't get any benefits?
Yeah, you're giving away a lot. I'm giving away a lot for nothing. That can happen. Although I wouldn't be so concerned about giving away a lot for nothing. I wouldn't be as concerned about that. What I'd be more concerned about is this a potential relationship that I can expand on? And the way to, is this a potential client for me? Like, if I'm interested in building a collaborative business, is this organization one where I can do that in a collaborative sense? And the way that I do that is I would have, before we started negotiating, I would have a conversation or a meeting on agreeing on how to agree.
Okay.
Agreeing on how to agree, to say, okay, look, we're coming to a negotiation stage in this process, so we're looking at negotiating this agreement or coming to an outcome that we're both happy with. Before we get into that negotiation, let's just agree on how we're going to agree. And it does two things. It helps. It starts you agreeing with each other, and this is really useful where there's either two things. There's either no relationship, it's very cold, or there's conflict in the relationship in the past. So you agree on how to agree. And even simple things like timing, venue, who's going to be there, where they're going to sit, do you have a U shape or a square table? Really simple things. And what you're doing is you're agreeing on how to agree. And then you start agreeing on the process of agreement. And I'd suggest spend more time in that stage. And if you still can't agree on how to agree, it's very unlikely you can progress. Unless you're a hostage crisis negotiator, I've watched a couple of awesome programs on that. I love the way these guys work. But sometimes they take years to achieve their outcome, right?
Yeah.
So you don't always have years to get there. So I'd say my best advice is agree on how to agree. Dumb it down to very simple things. Get that spirit of agreement, get that spirit of collaboration. They'll sense it in you too. And if you can't agree on how to agree, you're doomed. There's no way it can progress. Unless it's like there's a life at stake, or there's something very high order magnitude involved in terms of outcome. And most of us haven't got lives at stake. Thankfully for me, I'd be a lousy surgeon. I'd probably leave my tools at home or forget what day the surgery was on. So that wouldn't work for me. So I'd agree on how to agree, Dave.
Brilliant. That's a great way to finish. We'll agree on that's the end then. But no, it's been brilliant having this great conversation with you today, Peter. There's an awful lot of information you've handed out to people there. I think, thank you very much for sharing so much of your thoughts. I do appreciate that.
Absolute pleasure, Dave. And I genuinely hope that there's something of value here that can help you change your business.
Thanks very much. Take care, Peter.
Thanks, Dave.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.